everyone. So for today's lecture, we're going to be looking at immigration during the industrialization period. Immigration was really the fuel behind the manpower, behind the workers. People came to the United States during this period, pursuing the American dream, but also to work as part of the Industrial Revolution. So from 1880 to 1920, 2 million people migrated to the United States during this period. Um, they were coming here for the jobs, for the American dream. And actually, after this period, there were more Jews in New York City than there were in all of Warsaw, and there were more Italians in New York City than there were in Rome. So tons and tons of people are coming to the United States. But what's also happening is that there are new immigrants coming from new places. It's not just traditional immigrants that we'd seen from Britain, from Germany. You see immigrants coming from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and from the Far East. You see Italian immigrants, Greece, Poland, Russia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, China, and Japan. Massive numbers of people were coming to the United States from these new places, immigrants and people that had not traditionally come to the United States. Here's two pictures of some of these immigrants. These are pictures of Yugoslavian and Russian immigrants, so Eastern European immigrants who are coming to the United States. In these photos, you have a picture of immigrants from China and from Hungary. So imagine what it must have been like for these people leaving their homelands, crossing the oceans to come to America, to a new place, bringing their customs, bringing their ways of life with them, but also trying to start a new life. But also think about what it's like for the Americans who are already here, for the people who have made a life here, and to have immigrants coming who are from a completely different culture, who look very different, whose customs are very different. The reason that people were coming here was for the idea of the American dream. This is something we've talked about again and again. But the idea is for a higher standard of living and quality of life. People were coming here to get a job, to try to build a life, to try to make a better life for their family than they could have in their home countries. They also wanted a freedom to enjoy that life. A lot of people were trying to escape oppression of different kinds and to come to America, which is the land of the free. In many ways, people come for the same reasons today. We still hear a lot of talk of immigration today. And the reason that people come here is to find less exhausting, higher paying jobs. These are better jobs. They can support their family better. They also have more freedom here. A lot of immigrants to the United States come to find a safer home. They're refugees, or they're leaving some form of oppression, leaving a war-torn country, trying to escape something and find a better life. They want a better quality of life that's offered in the United States. Here you see a depiction of children in Syria on a day drinking water out of the street. We can't imagine these things in America because this is supposed to be the land where you have opportunity, where we have these things. We have rights such as running water. So people are leaving places to come for that opportunity. This slide to the one before it. These children are the same age, but this is what life should be like in America. It's the good life. You have a child trick-or-treating and a child running through the flowers, enjoying big smile, not drinking water out of the streets. This is why people come here, for this American dream, so that their kids may have a better life, so their kids may live in freedom, and that they can move up in society, enjoy themselves. And that's what you see in this depiction here, this cartoon here. You see the U.S. Ark of Refuge. You see Uncle Sam reaching out his hands, offering to bring these immigrants on. You see people of very different backgrounds bringing whatever they have with them. And what you see in the sky behind them there is dark monsters, things they're trying to escape, trying to leave their lives behind. And you see the United States being the welcoming place. Come to us for the American dream. So you have that inscribed on the Statue of Liberty from the poem by Emma Lazarus, The New Colossus, in the words of, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me, I lift my lamp beside the golden doors." The idea is that America will be your new home. Come to us and you can live that American dream. You can work in the factories and work your way up, maybe even own your own company one day. But in a lot of ways, the promise on the Statue of Liberty isn't necessarily lived out in everyday life. The immigrants are accepted and needed. They are needed to work in the factories. They are needed as fuel for this industrialization. They need workers. But in a lot of ways, they're not welcome to America. America has always feared new people. We saw this earlier in the earlier period with the Know Nothing Party, with the fear of German immigrants, but now you have people coming from all different parts of the world, and they're not being welcomed the way you might imagine. The most famous port of entry to the United States was Ellis Island. Ellis Island opened up in 1892, and over the next 62 years, 12 million people went through Ellis Island and immigrated to the United States. So they were processed here and became citizens of the United States, were allowed to come into the United States. Annie Moore was the first immigrant to pass through Ellis Island in 1892. She was a 17-year-old from Dublin, and like I said, was the first immigrant to be processed at Ellis Island. She lived in the Fourth Ward in New York City, which is the oldest and worst sections of the shanty towns in New York City. She married a German, Gus Shire, and she had 10 kids, 5 of which died during childhood from exhaustion, tuberculosis, pneumonia, bleeding from the mouth, and malnutrition. What Annie shows is an example of how hard it was for immigrants. Yes, they came for a new life. Yes, she was able to make a new life, but she lived in the worst part of town. Her life was filled with suffering. So that shows kind of the immigrant experience in the United States. So while they were needed, they were not welcomed in a lot of ways, and there was very little support because they were not welcomed. The government did not support them really anyway, so there was no welfare, there was no public housing, no food assistance, no office of employment, etc. Immigrants simply came here and had to figure out the life on their own. A lot of these immigrants relied on political machines, which would give them some benefits in exchange for votes, but these were corrupt institutions. One of these major institutions was run by Boss Tweed and was known as Tammany Hall. This was the Democratic Party political machine that basically ran New York, but they would give immigrants little advantages in exchange for votes, but it was a very corrupt system. Immigrants faced a really tough life once they were in America. They worked the toughest jobs for the lowest pay and the most dangerous conditions. You can see here this depiction of a man building a high-rise in New York City, most likely an immigrant, sitting there with no protective gear. These are the kind of jobs that immigrants had to work to make a new life. Immigrants took hard jobs in textile mills and steel mills, working hours on end for low pay and dangerous jobs. These were the kind of jobs that industrialization needed and that immigrants were willing to fill because they had no other options. One of the more demanding and laborious jobs was building the Transcontinental Railroad from the Pacific to the Atlantic. Chinese immigrants started to come here with the gold rush in California and were integral in building the Transcontinental Railroad. You can see the depiction there of Chinese immigrants working on the railroad in both these pictures. Working in the coal mines is incredibly demanding, incredibly dangerous. These jobs were often filled by Slavs, people from Eastern Europe, Italians, and Poles who worked long hours in these dangerous conditions and risked their lives to make a new life in America. Immigrants were often forced to live and work in slums. These are rundown places where families have to work together, live together in tight quarters, unsanitary, and they often have to work together. You can see here the depiction of immigrant family making flower bouquets on the left, and then you see the living conditions of an immigrant family on the right there, the rundown, small, living on top of each other. Can you find the 12 people in this picture? This is how a lot of immigrants lived. Lived on top of each other with just barely enough floor space to make your own to sleep, but they would have to do this because they didn't have enough money. But the idea was that they could come here and maybe make a life, live this hard life, and maybe move up. Immigrants were also met with hostility and fear. Americans who were here were critical and hostile towards these people coming from different places. One of the reasons for this was job competition. It said immigrants were willing to fill jobs for cheap labor and they were willing to do dangerous jobs. This can take jobs away from people who are already here. But there were also large religious and cultural differences. As I said, people were coming from Eastern Europe, from the Far East. They were coming with different religions, different cultures. You can see this depiction here of Uncle Sam holding up, not allowing this person in who has, likely depicted as a Jewish person, carrying poverty and disease, anarchy. So you can see the hostility towards these people. Another depiction of that hostility. You can see here Lady Liberty blocking the interests here with her dogs Law and Order. And you can see the different immigrants coming in, emptying from the sewers of Europe, from Italy, from Russia, from Germany. You can see with their knives, you can see depictions of communists, of socialists, trying to come into the country, and Lady Liberty is holding up Law and Order. Do not come in. Furthermore, you can see the depiction of the disdain for immigrants. You can see the stereotypes of the poor people in cloths and rags coming in, and Uncle Sam looking down with a furrowed brow, wondering what is happening. Here's the riffraff of immigration. You see these people floating across the ocean coming here, and Uncle Sam looking concerned, danger to American ideas and institutions. These immigrants are going to come and change it. They're going to take over. They're going to take our jobs. They're going to change our religions. They're going to change our culture. There were a lot of Irish immigrants who were coming during this period, and with that, there was a large fear of Catholicism. Remember, most of the people who had come to the United States have been Protestants. Um, Protestant institutions have been set up throughout the United States. Protestant churches had flourished. But now people are coming that are Catholic. And so you can see this depiction here of fear of Catholicism. You can see that the Catholics are depicted as alligators coming on the shores to attack the Protestants. You can see the U.S. public school destroyed there. The idea is that Catholics bring their own schools, they bring their own customs, different religion. So there is fear of other people. See in this poster here, the hatred of Jews, the fear of Jews. You see it says Jews, Jews, Jews everywhere. 12 million Christian American workers are jobless, telling you the horror of having all these Jewish immigrants coming. Communism is Jewish. Out with the Jews. Wake up. Anti-Semitism has deep roots not only in Europe but in America. People were afraid of Jewish immigrants. During this period, the immigrants who were probably the most hated were the Asian immigrants from China and Japan. The cultural clash in the Western states because of this, coming from very different cultures, very different religions. But you see these depictions here, and this lady pointing at her house says, "Japs keep moving. This is a white man's neighborhood." And then you see the depiction here of a Chinese person depicted as a rat, like looking at a box of rat poisoning. It has to clear out that they must go. So you can see the outright hatred of these immigrants. This hatred culminated in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This act excluded Chinese immigrants from coming to the United States. They could no longer come here. You can see that in the depiction here of the Chinese person waiting to come into the United States, but says, notice all these different people come in, but no admittance to Chinamen. The Chinese were outright barred from immigrating after 1882. The United States would eventually enact the Emergency Quota Act of 1921. This would be even further limited in 1924. Basically, what this did was set different percentages of immigrants that were allowed in the United States. In particular, immigrants from Eastern Europe and from other places. And what you can see is the depiction here of Uncle Sam, putting a 3% immigrant. So it's stopping the flow of immigrants into the United States. But despite the aggression, despite the fear, despite the different quotas and measurements to stop immigrants from coming, immigrants did come, and they did become citizens of the United States, and they did become part of the country. And that's where you get the idea of the melting pot here, of different people coming in and becoming equal in the eyes of the law. People assimilating to the United States, coming here for the American dream and becoming part of the American culture. So immigrants often moved to ethnic neighborhoods. That's where if you ever go to New York City, you see Little Italy, Chinatown, places like that. That's where immigrants often moved, lived together in these little bubbles. But it was really schools that helped to Americanize immigrant children. Children were forced to go to schools, and here they began learning the language, learning American institutions, and so these children become Americans in a lot of ways. Learning to play games, learning to play American games, learning to all get along. That's part of it here. You see these immigrant children here playing Duck, Duck, Goose, the game, but they're learning to become part of an American culture. That leaves us with where we are today in America. We still struggle with immigration in this country. It's still hotly debated whether immigrants should be allowed to come, who should be allowed to come, why they are coming. But America is a country built on immigration. America, in a lot of ways, is a melting pot of different cultures. coming together under a single idea of the pursuit of the American dream. And this really begins in earnest during the Industrial Revolution, where you get people from all over the world coming together and adopting this idea of working for wages, working towards the goal of the American dream, and the idea of the melting pot, and you see the diverse culture that we have today.